Hello and welcome to another Forgotten Railway story. For this one, I'm collabing with a good friend of mine who has a small but very good channel, and he goes by the name of Nigel. Say hello, Nigel.
Hello everyone, I'm Nigel's Rail Adventures, or simply Nigel. Today, me and West of Hudson Studios will discuss a former Mail and Express passenger train that Amtrak ran in remembrance of one of America's most famous luxury trains. Let's begin.
The Pennsylvania Railroad, one of the major mainstays of American railroading, known for its streamlined high-speed luxury trains, its glorious scenery, and iconic steam locomotives. It's one of America's most famous Class I railroads. It held many flagship and iconic names such as the Broadway Limited, Manhattan Limited, Cincinnati Limited, Colonial, and the Federal Express. Its most famous train was the Broadway Limited, which went from New York City to Chicago. It used the most luxurious equipment at the time, like the famous View series cars that were made specifically for the few top-of-the-line luxurious trains like this one. It was primarily a sleeper train that ran daily between the Big Apple to the Windy City.
The train was so famous that it survived way after the Amtrak takeover. Amtrak expanded the Broadway Limited drastically to stop at a lot more stations than the original train. When the train formally left the rails on September 9th, 1995, Amtrak got to work once again.
In order to continue running the Broadway Limited in a sense, they used almost the same route from Chicago to New York, but it went via Akron, Ohio and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This new service was called the Three Rivers.
This new Three Rivers service began immediately after the discontinuation of the Broadway Limited. Its first run was on September 10th of 1995, a day after the Broadway Limited was discontinued. The train originally ran between New York and Pittsburgh, extending the New York to Harrisburg Keystone service. Utilizing train numbers 40 and 41, it would exchange mail cars with the Chicago to DC Capital Limited in Pittsburgh, while through service passengers disembarked and changed trains.
Through service began on February 1st, 1996 by coupling two Three Rivers Amfleet coaches to the Superliner consist of the Capital Limited. Passage between the single-level and double-level cars was facilitated by a transition dome car. Amtrak ended the switching operation on November 10th, 1996 in favor of extending the Three Rivers to Chicago as an independent train. In doing so, they restored the Broadway Limited's numbers, 40 and 41, albeit neither its full dining service nor sleeping cars due to equipment shortages and an unfavorable schedule.
On April 1st, 1999, Amtrak would add a sleeper car to the Three Rivers. Utilizing four previously stored Heritage Fleet sleepers they had restored for $250,000 due to a Viewliner shortage. The last standard 10-6 sleepers operated by Amtrak would require an environmental waiver from the Federal Railroad Administration because of their direct dump toilets. When the waiver expired in October of 2001, Amtrak would retire these Heritage sleepers and replace them with Viewliners, which had since become available.
The Three Rivers had a very complex route. The Pittsburgh to New York Three Rivers stopped at Pittsburgh, Greensburg, Johnstown, Altoona, Huntington, Lewistown, Harrisburg, Lancaster, Paoli, Philadelphia, Trenton, Newark, and New York, and with the extensions to Chicago in 1996, service began to Hammond, Whitney, and Napanee. Other stops in Ohio were added as station improvements were funded: Youngstown, Fostoria, and Akron. Latrobe was added as a flag stop on May 17, 1998.
Highlights along the route included the famous Horseshoe Curve near Altoona, Pennsylvania, as well as the Allegheny Mountains. The entire New York to Chicago trip would take 19.5 hours. Despite the Broadway Limited being remembered like this being a good thing, this train had its issues.
Mail was one of the most important things to be carried by trains. It existed way before the phone and computer, before texting and emailing became a thing. Rail post office cars, or RPOs, were one of the most important cars of any train back then in the first half of the 20th century. Amtrak hauled mail on some of its long-distance trains in cooperation with the United States Postal Service, but as you might expect, Competition rose drastically with the railroads, and railroads all over America were in sharp decline during the 50s and 60s due to trucking becoming a more favorable option than a train.
By 1967, the Post Office Department of America had canceled all of its first-class express mail contracts, and by 1971, only one mail train remained. This was the Wash line from New York to D.C., operated by the, do I really gotta say it? Okay. The Penn Central. The contracts being canceled were a major hit to America's railroads as it provided them with most of their passenger trains' revenue. Amtrak would later take over this service, naming it the Fast Mail.
Trains still carried lower priority mail on passenger and freight trains, but it was a far cry from the Golden Age. However, the 1980s were putting a strain on the US Postal Service as highway and air congestion caused delays. The only other option was the railroad, and Amtrak was contracted for the job. They placed a new focus on the mail express freight business in the 1990s, and their trains could have over 20 freight cars of high-priority goods in tow. The Three Rivers used Amfleet coaches and either Amfleet Horizon Dinettes in addition to the later Heritage Sleeper. At the height of Amtrak's experiment with mail and express freight, a typical late 90s Three Rivers had 4 to 6 passenger cars and upwards of 25 mail and express mail cars. Mail and express freight deeply impacted Amtrak negatively, as it put a lot of strain on the United States Postal Service and the highways. Amtrak's mail and express business was marginal and did not justify the toll it took on passenger operations. The slower schedules necessitated by longer trains and the switching of express and mail cars at terminals caused passenger dissatisfaction and increased costs. The cost to lease or maintain aging equipment was another factor in the decision to exit the business.
In addition to notifying the Postmaster General in 2004, Amtrak advised officials in Florida, Ohio, and in Indiana that a limited number of stations would no longer be served by passenger trains as a result of the railroad's withdrawal from carrying mail and express.
Due to Amtrak's decision to depart from the mail and express freight business, the Three Rivers was discontinued and it had its last run on March 7, 2005. A little prior to Amtrak's founding, the Pennsylvanian route was covered by the Pennsylvania Railroad's Duquesne train, named after Fort Duquesne in Pittsburgh. Both trains were operated by the Pennsylvania Railroad, and from 1968 to 71 by the PRR successor, the Penn Central. The Duquesne had a long history, finally becoming a daily New York to Pittsburgh train on October 25, 1959, number 16 eastbound and 25 westbound. When the Pennsylvania Railroad successor Penn Central was formed in 1968, it continued to operate the Duquesne and the Juniata.
With the start of Amtrak operations on May 1, 1971, the Duquesne was renamed the Keystone and renumbered to 43 westbound and 42 eastbound, with the first Amtrak timetable on November 14, 1971. The Pennsylvania's Keystone train was discontinued on April 30, 1972. Amtrak returned the Pennsylvanian to the New York-Pittsburgh route on January 27, 2003, citing low ridership and the withdrawal from the express freight business.
On November 1, 2004, Amtrak merged the Pennsylvanian and the Three Rivers, keeping the latter name with the western terminus in Chicago. Amtrak had sought $2.5 million in assistance from the Pennsylvania to keep both trains running. On March 8, 2005, Amtrak truncated service to Pittsburgh to New York City and restored the Pennsylvania name of the route.
The train has been primarily financed by the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation since October 1st of 2013, when the Rail Safety Improvement Act of 2008 took effect. This federal law eliminated federal subsidies for Amtrak routes less than 750 miles in length.
In late 2019, the train began operating with a baggage car for checked baggage and bicycle handling at New York, Newark, Philadelphia, Lancaster, Harrisburg, Altoona, Johnstown, and Pittsburgh. Today, the Pennsylvanian is a successor to the Three Rivers and still runs daily between New York City and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Though mail and express freight by rail is long gone, you can still have your mail delivered by truck. During the mid-20th century, mail contracts were the biggest source of revenue for railways of North America. Nowadays, you can ride Amtrak's Pennsylvanian to remember the Three Rivers route, a failed mail and passenger train that went along the Northeast Corridor and through the Rust Belt to Chicago.
Thanks for watching another Forgotten Railway Stories video. Special thanks to my good friend Nigel for taking part in this video's production. Hopefully you guys learned something new today. Thanks for watching everyone and have a wonderful day.